found guilty of murders in Ashland, Kentucky in 1881. Here are his last words. I'd like to thank Mr. Tyree for showing kindness to me while I've been in his jail, and all of the good people of Carter County for their kindness. I only wish I had the opportunity to repay you with more than just words. Folks, I know it's too late for me, and if justice was done, I'd still be home with my mother and father. I call upon all you mothers and fathers to teach your children right from wrong, like my dear mother and father did for me. I have a good father and mother who raised me right. I stand here before you. I stand here before all of you and my God and declare that I am innocent of murdering those children. And I hope the Gibbonses and Thomases can find a way to forgive me for something that others have done. He then proceeds to sing, Dear Christ, O sinners weep, and shall our cheeks be dry. Let floods of potential grief burst forth from every eye. The Son of God in tears, the wondering angels see. To those astonished, O my soul, he shed those tears for thee. He wept that we might weep. Each sin demands a tear. In heaven alone no sin is found, and there's no weeping there. That is an introduction, or that is from Joe Castle's book, The Ashland Tragedy, which is what we're going to talk about today. Here with me is Daniel Hopkins. How you doing, Daniel?
I'm good, Jameson. I'm already intrigued.
I know it's a very, I left out just a little bit of those last words, just so it doesn't give away the story that we're going to tell here. But I got to give a shout out to Joe Castle. He sent this book to us. It's a great book to read, and we're going to kind of go through some of the main details, not into too many details, because I would encourage you greatly to go and get the book and read the book, because it's actually a really good book. You've read a lot of history books. I've read a lot of history books, I guess, as well. But sometimes they can be a little too factual, if that makes sense.
Yes.
But with this one, I was very entertained as well. Like I was glued to it, wanting to read the next chapter. I would encourage people to read it. You can get it. I'll put a link to get the book in the description as well. We're probably gonna have 2 or 3 episodes here talking about this because it's such a intriguing and honestly rough story to tell as well. There's some parts in here that things are going to get a little, I don't want to say dirty, but I mean, what's another way to say that?
Well, it depends. How long do you want to keep the crowd here with you? I mean, depending on how you're using the word dirty there, we could be getting into anything.
Grotesque, maybe. Bad. How's that sound?
This is a murder story.
Yeah, basically, yes. And a murder to the worst degree. We'll get into it. I think that's everything I got to spill on at the beginning. Let's think about Kentucky in the 1880s. Civil War is a little bit over. However, there's still a bit of unrest, with Kentucky as a whole, at least. There's a lot of vigilante justice going on. A lot of people kind of taking crime into their own hands. You get the reputation of Kentucky as being a rough and rowdy place, and I kind of feel like these 1870s, 1880s, 1890s is when that reputation really took hold, and is why Kentucky was known for being so rough, or is still maybe even known today as being rough as well. But Ashland in 1881 was a pretty good little town, a good thriving little small community. Everyone was peaceful. Everyone was kind of happy. There was not this outstanding look for violence or suspecting of crime. Policing and sheriffs at that time was kind of a big political deal as well. The North and the South tensions were still around, and those kind of those tensions were very thick. I mean, Civil War is a testy time, right?
Yeah, so you're looking at a time period here, like you said, you're 15 years after the Civil War. You have just seen Reconstruction in the southern states, not in Kentucky. They didn't have it in Kentucky, but where the military basically set up camp in a lot of the southern states and in many ways ran the place. This is Hatfield McCoy time. This is also the time period the New York Times sent a reporter to spend a year in Breathitt County, and basically front page news quite often about people getting murdered in Breathitt County in the late 1800s. And in many ways, it culminates with the Goebel murder on the steps of the Capitol. What was that right in 1900? So it was just, it was, you know, that I think that kind of caps it off. But this is right, as you said, this is during a 30, 40-year period of sort of unrest and chaos, not just in Kentucky, but in a lot of places, but certainly you'll see it in Kentucky as well. A
lot of vigilante, I guess, you know, justice lynchings were very common. And again, that wasn't just in Kentucky, that was around the nation. People wanted to take justice into their own hands if they didn't feel like it was being upheld. But our story starts with a family in Ashland in 1881, the Gibbons family. And we start with Martha Gibbons. Martha Gibbons lived in Geiger's Addition, which is kind of in the western part of Ashland. Before I even that, have you ever been to Ashland, Boyd County?
I have been to Ashland a couple of times. Nice place. It's I don't mean to be critical, but it's not as big as it has been in an earlier time period. The town's population is a little smaller, but a really neat, really old historical place in northeastern Kentucky.
Yeah, and if you think about, so you got Ashland and you got Ironton, Ohio, which is right north of there, and you also have Catlettsburg. I don't know, man. I think it's Catlettsburg. We'll have to. I think we'll have to have some local Ashland or local Boyd County people correct us. Now,
I think they're going to correct you.
Well, so anyway, kind of a little tri-state, tri-town area.
Huntington, West Virginia, not too far, and it all sits right on the Ohio River, which is coming down from Pittsburgh to Cincinnati, Louisville, and eventually empties into the Mississippi River just past Paducah. But historically, anything that sits on a river has a rougher edge to it. You get a lot of transient people, especially back then, people moving in and out, and so a lot of those towns on the Ohio River gained a reputation, as it were. You think about Ashland, Maysville, Newport, on around, just a lot of different things that happened. These were not, the cleanest, safest, neatest places, and you'll see that in this story.
Yeah, so Martha Gibbons lived in Geiger's Addition in the western part of Ashland. She was married to John Gibbons, and they had 3 children. I should say they had 3 children alive at this time. Their youngest kid was Sterling, and he was 11 years old. They had a daughter, Fanny, who was 14. And then they had a son, Robbie, who was 17. And the thing is, Robbie was the main provider for the family. And he was a huge inspiration for the town, a very respected young man, mainly because he had lost one of his legs and in a rail car accident when he was 10. So he'd kind of, I guess adapted to not having both legs. And he worked really hard. He worked in the iron ore, or I think the iron factory. I don't know what you call that exactly. And also, a year prior to this, in 1880, they had another child who had died, and that child was 4 years old. So the family kind of had some heartaches already, and this just piles things on. But John and Martha had lived in Virginia, and they moved to West Virginia, and then they finally had settled in Ashland. And they didn't really have what you would call a fairy tale marriage. It was a bit rough. John was he would leave a lot of times for extended periods, months even at a time, and then come back and then leave again. There was a lot of rumors that he abused Martha, and he also drank a lot, which those kind of things sometimes go hand in hand. And at the time that we're telling this story, he was gone. John had been gone for a while. Not the most perfect husband or the best father, which is the picture that you get of John here. Robbie, again, he's the provider of the family. And at 17, that's very commendable. And on top of that, he has a handicap, or he only has one whole leg. So pretty interesting family dynamic. But mainly just bringing that up so everybody kind of gets the scene or gets the setting, gets a bit of connection to this family. And as we go through this, it's just a tragedy. That's the best way to say it. December 23rd, 1881. John had been gone. And for the holidays, Martha and Sterling, the youngest boy, had decided to go to Ironton, Ohio for Christmas to visit her married older daughter. And that's another thing. I know that John and Martha, I believe, both had previous marriages, and they had children in those marriages as well. But anyway, I don't know what happened to their wives or husbands exactly. But Martha had asked a lady named Caroline Thomas if her daughter, Emma Carrico, could go and spend time with Fanny until Robert got home. And this would have been prevented. They wouldn't have had to have this happen at all if John was home, but he wasn't. He was gone again. He'd been gone for a while. So kind of a sleepover, if you want to say that, but kind of how the night went. Emma left her house at 6 p.m., and it was the last time that she would see her mother as well. From this point on, we don't really know what happens until about 4:30 a.m. Between that period of time is kind of where the unknown kind of begins. But at 4:30 a.m. on Christmas Eve morning, so Miss Thomas wakes up to stoke the fire. She saw a lamp burning in the Gibbons house, which is not uncommon, but probably a little bit uncommon because it's 4:30 in the morning. She's thinking, kids are up. Why so early? And I mean, nowadays, or even back then, kids might stay up from time to time a little bit later, up to some mischief. Who knows what they might be doing? Nowadays, be playing video games, of course. So she stepped outside, kind of to get a better look and to see what was going on. But then as she saw what was going on, things changed quickly. She noticed that it wasn't a lamp burning. It was actually flames coming out of the window. Big flames, obviously, if they're coming out of the window. So she goes into a massive panic, as any parent would, and she takes off running to the house screaming fire. If you're thinking about the scene, this town, I mean, this is Ashland, so the houses aren't going to be too far apart. This is still a growing town. But I mean, what do you think as far as like the house? How would you describe the housing layout? I mean, street by street?
Yeah, it's Ashland is one of those places like it's a gridded off downtown,
mm-hmm.
and then there's a lot of streets that kind of come out of that. If you're in downtown Ashland, if you kind of look to Kentucky, as it were,
mm-hmm.
like if you're today, you're looking toward I-64 or whatever, you get into some hills in and around there as well. And just based kind of on what we're seeing so far, the name of the street, you said at the beginning it was kind of in the western mm-hmm. part of it. It would appear that this town has grown some. People are moving away from the city, which tells you a lot about the people that are there. But on the flip side, it's also going to be in many ways a negative, because the further you got from the city, the further you get from services that the city might be able to render.
Right, yeah. And the reason I bring that up or even want to talk about that is kind of you got Miss Thomas here running towards the house that she could see from her window. There's houses around. It's not as excluded as you may think. People are going to be woken up by this, and that's exactly kind of what happens. When she gets there, she couldn't get into the front door, so she runs to the side door, which was unlocked. And this whole time, of course, she's yelling frantically for her daughter and the other kids. But she's able to open the door, but the smoke is just so unbearable, she can't get in. The neighbors begin to awake, of course, and they all form a Bucket Brigade. You know what a Bucket Brigade is?
Yeah, so here's one of the negatives of living back in that time period. And you sometimes see this on movies. One of the best examples is the movie Gangs of New York. We talk at the beginning about things being political, and in many cases, things in cities were political with fire departments or whatever it would be. Those were political things. And in that movie, 2 different fire departments show up at a fire, and they just fight each other instead of the fire. That's not the case right here, but the story, the notions of our modern fire department don't necessarily jive with the fire departments there. And so a bucket brigade, everybody in the neighborhood, everybody in the community is filling a bucket with water and you're passing it down the line. Not an effective way. I mean, it's all they had, but not an effective way to put out a fire and limit the damage.
Well, when you think about, you fill the bucket up and the first person has it full of water, by the time it gets to the last person, hopefully it's got a lot of water in it, but it's not going to be full. And then you're just kind of circling back and forth. It's a long process. I would not.
If I can cite another movie, The Little Rascals from back in the early 90s, when the clubhouse catches on fire, they do a bucket brigade, and by the time the bucket gets to the clubhouse, it was completely empty. That's a joke, but it's definitely there's truth in that. Something like a house fire, shoot, even up until the last, even sometimes today, that something like a house fire was probably going to be a total loss, really, no matter the situation. And that's what we're going to see right here.
Yeah. So while that's all going on, a neighbor comes and breaks the window in to kind of help and trying to get the kids out of there. I mean, they assume the kids are in there, but the neighbor breaks the window and he actually trying to see if he can see anybody in there, but he couldn't. So he begins to feel around, and he still couldn't feel anybody in there. So he goes to another window, breaks it out, and here he's able to see the hand of one of the girls' bodies. And he has one of the neighbors lift him in. He's able to lift Emma's body out. And then another neighbor, J.W. House, he goes in next, and he is able to find Fanny Gibbons' body on the bed covered in burning clothes. And he's able to get her out the side window. And then after he gets back out, he gets his breath and he goes back in again and is able to find Robbie's body, and he drags him out with the help of some other neighbors. So that kind of gets those three children are out. But then the neighbors begin to freak out even more because they think Sterling, the younger Gibbons boy, is still in there. But they finally are able to realize that he's not in there with consulting Miss Thomas and so forth. But the fire had caused such a blaze they couldn't go back in. Even if they were able to, they couldn't have went back in the fire, which they wouldn't have been able to. But the fire was just too much. However, with all that, which this is a pretty tragic event already. The doctors come, I guess it would have been doctors, of course. But they looked to see what the children had died from, and they're able to determine that they didn't burn to death, they didn't die from smoke inhalation, but that they had been murdered, and therefore that sets the first part of this Ashland tragedy up. Somebody had went in, killed these kids, and burnt the house down.
So this is interesting to me that there was at least any notion of I don't know if you call this an autopsy, but at least some kind of examination. To me, the obvious answer is that these kids burned up in the house, or they or they breathed in smoke, and they were young and disoriented from being asleep or whatever. It's interesting that there was even an examination of this to me.
The story is wild and crazy enough in its own. Whenever they saw the bodies, so that they brought the bodies out, and I guess just upon looking at them, they were like, this doesn't seem right, and they began to examine them. But the whole town, pretty much had come out because you would. Think about a house burning in the middle of your subdivision or something. People are going to come out and say, well, and if they can't help, if the fire, in today's time, the fire department hopefully would already be there, but you would want to help however you could. But these people actually had to help. There was no other way. So the doctors would have been out there. People would have been out there to say, hold on, let's, this doesn't, or somebody in the crowd could have easily said, this doesn't look something's a ruse here.
So
but
let me.
Go ahead.
You can. This may not need to be on, so you might want to edit it out. But a couple of years ago, the people who lived across the street from us, their house burned down.
Uh-huh.
And where we live, there's 40 houses or whatever, and like everybody sort of converges. The fire department is just right around the corner, though, so they were here. So we weren't bucket brigading or anything like that. But immediately, why did the house burn down? And there was rumors floating around everywhere.
Yeah.
And these were people who there'd been a couple things happen, in the year or so prior that they had been there. But everybody's speculating. So when we think about these kids in this situation, there's people that are saying, blah blah, this or that, all these rumors, would take foot on this. Why did the house burn down? Well, maybe the house burned down because that's just what happens to houses, but that's not really an acceptable answer. Yeah. People want to speculate on that, and this was 125 years ago. But we still do the same thing. From personal experience, we did the same thing 2 years ago across the street. So. Yeah.
Well, speculation leads to rumors, and rumors breed fast, or they go quickly. John Gibbons wasn't there. Martha was gone. Plenty of things can go. Maybe the kids were just messing around and something accidentally caught fire, but you would think they would be able to get out in that sort of sense. But the search is on. People, this looks like it's a murder, and people begin to search who did what, or who's to blame. After the fire had kind of rolled down, more things kind of appeared or came to life. Robbie was the least burnt, and the girls had been burnt to the point that they were hardly recognizable, and they'd been burnt extremely bad in their midsections. So more things kind of coming up, people kind of rumors or whatever you would want to say. It looked like that the girls had been burnt while they were on the bed. There was an axe found that had blood and hair on it, and a crowbar with some blood and hair on it as well, in a cracked fence. And this, of course, is all happening. I don't exactly know from 4:30 to this time, I would think 2, maybe 3 hours later, the sun's rising. This is probably spreading fast. People are probably already beginning to look, and they find a crowbar and they find the axe. People are starting to put this together. The justice of the peace came, and he began the investigation of the cause of death. I won't go into too many details because this stuff is a bit graphic and all that, and you can read the book for it. But it did appear that the girls had been raped. So that opens us up to a whole nother game here. To kind of what the extent of this tragedy is. I mean, one thing, house burns down. Two things, a house burns down with your kids inside of it. A third thing, a house burns down, kids inside it, and it looks like they've been murdered. I mean, this is a big thing to entail, and that's one of the things that, like, as the people are kind of gathering around, who's going to go tell Martha about this? I mean, who's going to go and tell her that this has happened? She's up north. She's not here. I can't even fathom to think about having to go and tell this mother this what has happened. And of course, the people of the community are very much outraged. They are seeking quick justice because this shouldn't happen in their town. It shouldn't happen in any town. It shouldn't happen at all. But here it is. It's happened. As I said before, I think I might have said that Martha and John's youngest son had died when he was 4, but he died when he was 5. His name was Harry. It's crazy to think about how much tragedy this family has endured in this little, in 10 years, how much a son loses a leg, a son dies, and then a son and a daughter die as well. Tragedy is rough. So people, hundreds of people attend a meeting that is ran by the mayor, John Means, at the time. And this is all about finding out information, what kind of leads there are to an arrest, and also a reward. So $200 reward, which that is still, those kind of things still happen today. But, you know, I don't know. How effective do you think it is whenever, because you see ads and stuff like that around, you know, or for whatever, $200 to, or whatever a reward it could be. You know, I guess people, they have to help today as well too, wouldn't you think?
I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah, but I kind of think back then $200, that's a lot of money.
Definitely so.
So this committee also to collect donations for the detective fees, which is a bit, kind of sets me up like, why are they paying a detective to solve this? But why would they be paying a detective to solve this?
Interesting.
No thought?
Well, I don't know. You know, it's...
Well, this is my thought. Police department at the time probably isn't the police department we would think of as now.
Sure.
So I would think like a detective. These were hire detectives for hire.
Yes.
And you can find private investigators and stuff like that nowadays, but there are actually detectives on the police force that kind of take care of these kind of situations anyway. But in that time, I guess that they had to hire a detective for things that were out of their local police's ability or jurisdiction, or I would guess ability. I don't know how many police officers they had or sheriffs they had at that time in Ashland or Boyd County, you know. That's my thoughts, I guess. Does that make sense?
You know, I think so. You know, we have to keep, like you said a minute ago, you kind of have to keep going back in time. Our notions of police and fire are just so skewed by what modern day police and fire are like. And, you know, we make these assumptions that things have always been the same way, and that's not accurate. You know, these detectives, these for hire police departments, whatever you want to call them, you know, you think about this was the time of the Pinkerton agents and all that, and that's not necessarily what these are, but that was kind of what people's jobs were for that. You know, I'm guessing they hired because, you know, they kind of want to know. But, you know, you also sometimes wonder if people hire because they don't want to know. And, you know, if you hire the right person to tell the thing that you want them to tell, you know, there's that notion that kind of comes into mind as well.
So the committee, the community and the committee, you know, want to act quickly. They know they need to act quickly. They also know that the newspapers are going to kind of stoke the fires or get things going. I'll read something from the Cincinnati Inquiry on December 25th, 1881. It does not seem possible that the proprietors of this fearful crime can long escape detection. It is safe to say that their tenure of life will be very brief after they are caught and returned to Ashland. These kind of saying that, you know, if they're caught, they'll be lynched, if anything. Let's see, the next day, from the way in which the people talk, it will be a miracle if the lynch law doesn't prevail, in case the commission of the bloody deed in question be fastened upon anybody in this vicinity. The newspaper, as typical of the news outlets, I guess, are kind of flaming the fire, you know, getting this kind of stirred up. And not to say it wouldn't have happened anyway. Again, like we said before, lynchings were happening a lot around the country. You know, if the like you said, if the verdict wasn't getting done fast enough, if the guilty party wasn't being executed or justice wasn't being served, the people took it up on their own and did what they wanted to do. Anyway, so by this time, about $1,000 had been raised for private donations, which is a lot. This is a pretty large reward. But what comes with rewards, or the larger the reward, what's going to come along with it?
Oh, you're going to get a lot of crack pipe. I'm sorry, crack pipe. You're liable to get a whole lot of people saying a whole lot of stuff that's not necessarily true.
Yes, and people who are going to come just to get a verdict, or attention, a verdict, and to get the reward. So the committee comes up with two detectives, Alf Burnett and John T. Norris. The committee decided to go with Norris. He was the more experienced detective. I guess that's really he was an older fella, but that's what the committee decided to go with. So Norris is selected. However, Burnett, who was a younger guy, he comes to Ashland anyway, hoping to kind of solve the crime on his own. And that's the thing that kind of baffles me with this detective hiring and those sorts of things. Is like, basically anybody could just show up and say, hey, I'm a private detective, or hey, I'm a detective. Let me talk to the prisoners, or, let me see the crime scene. And that's kind of how it would go, It would be kind of a weird kind of, anybody can kind of do this sort of situation. But Burnett comes anyway. While all of this is going on, they have to come and actually bury the children, which you can only imagine would be a terrible, terrible scene. So they bury the children, which is actually was one of the largest, is the largest funeral procession, I think, in Ashland, even to this date. The burial of the children. But anyway, Norris shows up the day they're burying the children, and he begins to investigate the crime scene. And he even has a big conversation with Martha Gibbons the day that she buries her children, which, to me, that would just be terrible. And I mainly bring that up just to kind of get an idea of Norris's methods here. I would think common sense would say, maybe I should wait till tomorrow to talk to this woman. He had said when he arrived that he would not claim or make any accusations until he was for sure he knew who the murderer or the murderers were. And basically, after he talks with Miss Gibbons, and he finds out that John Gibbons has been gone, and then by 9 p.m. that night, he claims that John Gibbons is the murderer. He claims that based on, one, John Gibbons' behavior, but also this letter that Martha gives to him that John wrote her 11 years ago. Let me find it here, and I'm going to read the letter because it's a pretty... Here's a letter that John wrote Martha 11 years ago, prior to the fire, prior to the murder. When old men have outlived all their friends, it is then time for them to die. I have no idea of ever committing the rash act of self-destruction. If I do, it will be where you and the children will never see me. I feel as if I had not a friend on earth, and it is reasonable that I should want to live any longer. Others have put an end to their existence. How, then, can you expect me to live and witness my own shame? I have struggled 57 years alone in the world. Now find my life has been a blank. All my efforts have been in failure. My whole life has been spent in running after babbles that always burst when I touched them. There you go. That's his evidence. And he determines that John is the murderer. Which, by that letter, I get the feeling that John is probably not the most stable person.
So when you have people hired to find things, when you have people hired to do detective work, even when they are members of a police force, there's a lot of pressure to get that solved. And truthfully, public pressure tends to want it solved ASAP. Yeah. 3 months from now is too long, and you think about, like, he's got a letter like that you just read right there. He supposedly has the case solved by 9 o'clock at night after he, basically has just got there. But this is what people want. And it's kind of a balancing act of, we have to solve this, but we can't look like we're just, dragging, dilly-dallying. here's John Gibbons, and he's tied up in it. This is his family. He's the guy. It seems like he's crazy. He's been gone forever. All this kind of stuff. Maybe he killed himself. Who knows what he did? We don't know. But this is the guy that did it.
Yeah.
It's kind of like asking for explanations for why things happen. Well, it's easier just to scapegoat. But, a lot of times we want that quick answer. And it feels like that's kind of what we're getting right here. An 11-year-old letter. That's a tough thing to hang an entire case on, as it were.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you would expect, John Gibbons' name is completely run through the mud. The newspapers write about him, and people began to search for him all across the area. Norris even thinks, you even mentioned this, thinks, hey, search the rivers and the waterways because he could have killed himself. And there's another reward is offered for the body. Gibbons' first wife, and here's some other kind of, some evidence, I guess, if you want to say it, but it's also hearsay. Gibbons' first wife had died, and there was rumors that murder was the cause of her death, but those are rumors. And of course, this helps paint John in a darker light. People just hate him, vilify him. What you would if that's all you knew, John Gibbons was the murderer. These kids died. He killed his own kids in this and burned his house down. It makes sense that people would be like, this is a terrible person. But the longer he was away, the more guilty he looked. And Norris, however, did disagree that the girls had not been raped. He went against what the doctor said. He said the girls had not been raped. I don't know what qualified him to do that, but he said it had not been raped and that John Gibbons was the murderer. That's his analysis of the case. However, Deputy U.S. Marshal James Heflin shows up, and he came to Ashland with an interest for the crime, and he wanted to go and produce John Gibbons. He showed up at the crime, but he wanted him being there to be kept private. He did not want anybody to know that he was there. And I guess this makes a bit more credibility if he's the U.S. or the Deputy U.S. Marshal. He's not just a deputy to hire per se. However, with his intel, he gathers up his information, and he knows where John Gibbons is, and that he's in West Virginia. And that's where we're going to stop right here for this episode. Cliffhanger. Bah, bah, bah. Pretty wild story. Definitely just getting into it. I do want to say this too. If you have any questions for Joe Castle, he will be coming on the show once we get these episodes done, and we can ask him any questions, because there's some of this that I don't know, all the details to, and I'm purposely leaving out some details because they're rough to talk about, and I want to encourage you to read the book, because the book is very well put together, as I said before. Final thoughts or overall thoughts there?
Well, it's an interesting story. I keep going back to the sort of the same topic of just a different time and place. I don't want to jump ahead of anything, but there's no such thing as DNA. There's no such thing as DNA evidence. A lot of the things, I'm thinking, episodes of Law and Order kind of stuff that would be used. You just don't have that. And so, we can look back on this and say, I don't know the methods that they're using, all these different people coming in to investigate. But the reality of this is, I don't know if this was common or not. This may have been common methods. Everything that we do now is built upon things that we've done in the past. And so, very interesting story, but also one that, feels like getting a hard and fast and true answer might be tough, just because of the time period.
Yeah. And I got two thoughts of it as well. In one thought, having 2 or 3 people investigating it could possibly lead to more information and a quicker result as well. But on the flip side, the old saying, too many spoons in the bowl or too many stirrers in the pot, however, I'm not sure what it is right off. But, that also holds true. you have all these people coming in to investigate. They could also get in each other's way. And we mentioned 3 so far. But as the story goes out, it pans out pretty. The evidence, the information comes to be a bit more solid, and we'll talk about that more later. But overall, just a terrible, terrible tragedy to happen. And this is one because it does get national news that people are reading about. They know about it. I found articles from all over the country about this after me looking into it personally as well. We'll get to the bottom of it, and I guess somebody's already got to the bottom of it. But we'll get to the next episode, and things will kind of clear up a little bit. And as we go, it's very tragic. That's the best way to say about it. Anyway, so again, if you want to connect to us, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook at KOHistoryPod, and all that good stuff as well.
Kind of interested to see how it plays out.
Well, Daniel, thanks for joining us for this episode, and we will continue our talks soon. All right. So stay tuned. All right. Well, thanks for listening. We'll see you next time.